And now for the next session of the agenda on our main conference. We have three absolutely fantastic individuals with us today. Now, please help me welcome them. A very good morning. Are they here? They're joining us from three different locations. A very good morning, lady and gentlemen, joining us from the UK, Hong Kong, as well as Singapore. I'd like to begin by welcoming Dr. Rafael Ramirez. You're joining us from wintry England. What time is it where you are now?
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for welcoming me. I'm very honored to be here. It's 2:43 in the morning here.
Well, we're very honored to have you join us at that time. And I hope you've had quite a few cups of coffee or tea to keep you up.
I'm okay. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Rafael Ramirez is Director of the Oxford Scenario Program and Professor of Practice at Oxford University. And now next on our panel is Chris Leong, Chief Marketing Officer of Schneider Electric, fellow Malaysian. Hi, Chris, how are you?
Hi, how are you doing today? Good morning, selamat pagi, assalamualaikum.
Thank you so much for joining us. And finally, our moderator for the session joining us from Singapore is Manoj Menon. He is the founder and managing director of Twimbit. And of course, he's moderating our session today. Manoj, how is life in Singapore?
Hey, life is as normal as we can be in these trying circumstances, but great to be here. Thank you very much, Deborah.
Thank you. And talking about normal life as we know it, I think today's topic is very timely. Our panelists are going to deliberate on a very important subject matter, one that is of significant importance as we face the future with unprecedented challenges. Reimagine a digital-ready future with scenario planning. And with that, I'm going to hand the mic over to Manoj to begin the session. Over to you, Manoj.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Good morning to all of you from my living room to your living room. In my wildest of imaginations, at the start of this year, if you would have told me that I would be speaking in so many webinars and so many conferences in 2020, people would have called me mad, right? But that is how this world has played out to be. Today, we have about 55 million people impacted by COVID globally. Right? And there are, about 1.3 million deaths. They say the economic impact of this is potentially about close to 12 trillion. If you add the healthcare impact, which may last for several years, then maybe we are talking about a $16 trillion impact to the global economy. Right? And it is in that context when I was told that the topic today is scenario planning. And when I was told that topic, the first thing that occurred to me is, wow, so could we have planned for this better? Could we have saved some more lives? Could we have had lesser impact on the millions of, hundreds of millions of jobs that have been lost around the world? Could we have prepared better as nations, as companies, as individuals, so that we could respond to it better? But then I also look at the silver lining. Right? On the other end, I see that the NASDAQ and the stock markets are at an all-time high. It seems to indicate that as a humanity, we have responded well, and there is a lot of belief in the companies of today that we are responding well to these challenges. The COVID vaccine is out in the shortest possible time ever possible. So humanity has responded to that extremely well as well. So did we do well? Did we not do well? Could we have done better? Those were the questions which were top of the mind. And how do we deal with this uncertainty? It seems like these geopolitical issues, environment issues, man, we are being surprised every second day. And dealing with uncertainty is now a way of life. So does scenario planning become a very critical element in us managing and navigating this change more effectively? And that is the context of this session. So I'm hoping at the end of this session, maybe we will learn, hey, what is it really? Because I had a lot of confusion when I first started hearing about the subject, and Chris very kindly gave me a good lecture on it. Second is, how do you go about it? Yeah? Third is, who is responsible for it? And what is the what are the challenges if we don't do it? So I'm hoping we can address all of this. And as Deborah mentioned, I think we have the best potential panel in this world to address this because, first up, Dr. Professor Rafael Ramirez. I think his name is now synonymous with scenario planning. He has spent over, I believe, 2 decades researching this subject, authored books on this subject. He runs the award-winning program with Oxford Scenarios Planning. He's so passionate about it. He's up at 2:45 in the morning to tell us all about it and share his knowledge. so welcome and thank you, Professor. And we have Chris. Chris, as you know, she's from Malaysia. She's now a globally well-recognized leader. So I think many Malaysians are super proud to see you as a member of the Global Executive Committee of a company that is, oh my God, 185 years old, right? A company which has led through so many pandemics. And even more important, I was looking at the Schneider stock price just this week. It's at an all-time high. So clearly, there is something Schneider knows about navigating not one, but many pandemics. So I think I'm truly thrilled to have this opportunity to have this conversation with both of you. So let me first start with Professor Ramirez, and maybe I think while we all have interpretations of scenario planning, I think as the potential godfather on this subject, maybe you should tell us what is scenario planning and the critical importance of it and how you have practiced and taught this over the last several decades.
Thank you very much, Manoj, and thank you to TM1 and Telecom Malaysia, Deborah. Very glad to be here with Chris, with whom I've been able to do work over the years, her colleagues in Schneider Electric, as you have said, and have done very well, using scenario planning to drive innovation into the digital transformation from fossil fuels to a post-fossil world. Basically, what we do is very simple in principle. Instead of looking at the possibilities for digitalization from today in 2020 towards the future, what we do is we invent useful points of view from the future to look at the present. And so if one were to be advising TM1 and its many customers in the public and private sector, instead of going what we do in strategy, and I'm classified in Oxford as a strategy professor, which is to plan for today for tomorrow, what we look at is what kind of tomorrow will our strategy inhabit? And instead of focusing on the strategy as such, we focus on the context that the strategy is going to inhabit. And we try to prepare organizations, public organizations and private organizations. I'm very glad to say I've had many students in senior positions in Malaysia, both in the public sector and in private companies. So maybe some of them are listening at the moment. To develop an alternative view to the one that is expected in the strategy. So if I'm planning for context A, and context A does not show up over time, and context B does arise, have I imagined context B in advance? I cannot predict it. That's what forecasters do. We work with a part of the future that you cannot forecast. So we look at the deep, uncertain future. And if that future is different from the one that is expected, can we become agile enough to shift from A and go to B and be able to pivot our strategy from the one future that we had planned for an alternative future that we did imagine and for which we rehearsed different options. Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. So maybe first up, let's get the simple question out of the way, which is, could we have prepared better for this pandemic globally as a society, as governments, as companies, or did we do reasonably well? How do you see that? And could scenario planning could have helped us to even do better?
Well, Scenario Planner has helped. There's, for example, at the moment in the BBC In the iPlayer, you can look at it. There's a series called The Trump Show, which is a 3-hour series on the Trump presidency, the last 4 years of the Trump presidency. And one senior official in the United States is interviewed in that series. I mean, a lot of very people that have been involved in the presidency have contributed to that. Rudy Giuliani is interviewed, John Bolton is interviewed, etc., etc. One of them says that the federal government in the United States had A, imagined a pandemic, and B, had developed a whole playbook, had rehearsed what would need to be done at the federal level to do that. And I know from our students and many practitioners that we interact with that many organizations had imagined pandemics and rehearsed possibilities. The problem, according to this interviewee in the BBC, for the American response is that the federal government did not follow its own playbook. In other words, they had rehearsed what would be an appropriate response, and then for policy reasons decided whoever was in charge of this particular lead decided not to follow on what had been rehearsed. I suspect, having seen how successful the New Zealand government has been, that they had also done some preparation for a pandemic, and they apparently did follow through with their rehearsed future and were much more effective in saving lives than our American colleagues have been. So many people have prepared for pandemics. The first time I heard the word pandemic was when I was working in Shell Group Planning as a visiting professor of scenarios and corporate planning between 2000 and 2003. And one of my colleagues, Angela Wilkinson, who's now at the World Energy Council, was designing a scenario planning engagement that Shell collaborated with the United Nations on the future of AIDS in Africa. And she was sitting literally next door to me in the Shell headquarters. And she was the first person that introduced the word pandemic to me back in 2001, I think it was, or 2001 or 2002. So yes, there's been a lot of work over the years on how to prepare for pandemics. Some of the people that prepared for it actually followed through with the preparations. Others did not, and we can see the consequences.
Yeah. And what are the most common mistakes? So one is you have a playbook. It's sad that they didn't follow a playbook. What are the other common mistakes that companies make with regards to scenario planning? Because business planning is a ongoing exercise in companies. Do we misinterpret scenario planning and integrate it with business planning? So what are these mistakes that companies end up doing, Professor?
Well, I was teaching 40 people online thanks to COVID. Our scenarios program is being delivered online virtually for the first time late yesterday. And you see lots of mistakes being made across the world. One very common mistake, and it's good the way Deborah and you introduced me, is that people sometimes think that a forecast is a scenario. And the forecasters who have been shown over and over again to be wrong about all kinds of forecasts. I mean, we could certainly go back to just a few weeks ago, what the polls said about the outcome of the American election and how far away from reality they've turned out to be. Forecasters use yesterday's data and they model it and they forecast that into the future. And for certain things like, calculating demand of telephone traffic, which I'm sure our friends in Telecom Malaysia and TM1 do, that's very useful. Or for scheduling flights between Malaysia and Australia or Tokyo or wherever it is. Forecasting is a very useful methodology, but it does not work well with the uncertain future that we deal with. And one of the confusions people have is to confuse scenarios for forecasts. We do not do scenarios to predict which future will happen. We do not put probabilities to that future. What we look at is, what if the future we are expecting were not to happen? And how well prepared are we to get away from the plants that we have already had and move towards another one. I was just talking with one of our graduates, Colette, who runs strategy for Diabetes UK. I don't know how big diabetes is in Malaysia, but in the UK, it was the single biggest disease group for the whole National Health Service before we got hit by COVID. About 22% of the National Health Service budget was directed towards diabetes. It's really an epidemic, and it's going up as a percentage. And she said that having done scenarios for them helped them not only to prepare for an alternative future, but particularly to exit the future that they had been working on, because they had already rehearsed what leaving that trajectory felt like and being able to move to an alternative one. So yes, it's very helpful to not confuse forecasting with scenarios and to use scenarios to shift from one trajectory to an alternative faster and in a more agile way.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Let me now talk to Chris for a few minutes. And so Chris, scenario planning for a 184-year-old company, what does that really mean? And what does it look like?
Oh, thank you. Thank you to TM1, Manoj, yourself, and Deborah. Well, you know, as a fellow Malaysian, I'm really honored to have the opportunity to join all of you today to discuss scenario planning played in Schneider. I think Professor Ramirez has helped us through many years in navigating through some of the few bold bets that inform and guides our strategic framework in this way. In simple terms, for us at least, scenario planning helps us interrogate our assumptions in a much more holistic manner for the future that, you know, as Professor said, can take many forms. And what each and every one of those scenarios would require for success. Identify the risk of mitigation, and hopefully, you know, have a playbook that we would use when the need arises. So I just want to set a little bit of context. I joined Schneider about 9 years ago. And I remember when I first joined, I came from a B2C world. I was always reminded, hey, it is a blue-collar industrial sector providing electricity in safe and reliable way for over 180 years. Don't rock the boat. Everything is good. We should just do business as usual. And it is not about Schneider. The entire category is fairly conservative, as you can imagine, whether you are a manufacturer, distributor, contractors. Remember, that was not 180 years old. I mean, you know, it's 9 years ago. It's 2012. And at that time, e-commerce will already reach $1 trillion US. And 35% of the world population were already internet users. And to make it more exciting, at that time, I just joined Schneider from 7 years in Nokia, where mobile has leapfrogged connectivity to new levels, changing lives around the world. So imagine when I discover an industry, entire ecosystem that is still very much based on brick and mortar, ordering by person, by phone. And remember this thing called a fax machine? Some of you may still remember that. Now, overnight, I enter a world where a mobile R&D that normally takes less than 9 months and launch in 2 weeks, and maybe, you know, the industry would like you to change it every 9 months or so, to an electrical equipment world where R&D is at least over 4 years. A product launch would take us about 3 years to get through around the world, and a lifetime installation of our equipment, thanks to the good quality, but it lasts 20 to 30 years. It is a big reset moment. Can you imagine that? So I wanted to say that a lot of this really is due to the vision of my boss, our chairman and CEO, Jean-Pascal Tricoire. I mean, Manoj, you were very kind to highlight some of that in our introduction. And yes, we are at an all-time high. We're very proud about how our investors and the capital market is acknowledging what we're doing. We made a series of scenario planning that completely breaks the convention on the definition of an expected electrical manufacturer. I think a lot of people, I hope online today listening, can probably identify whether you are in electrical distribution or some other businesses. There are a lot of conventional, traditional thinking. What are the possible disruption scenarios to a protected by standardization category such as ours? that has existed pretty much in the same shape since the first light bulb by Edison in 1882. So I have to tell you, it is instigated by one key factor, climate change. We set out to look at scenarios of the world that could be impacted by three things. Digitization, which I think we heard a lot during the opening keynote. Energy transition, which I haven't heard a lot of, and I think we should all take care of this, and sustainability, without which I don't think you can have a sustainable business and a livelihood. So fast forward to today, Schneider's purpose is to empower all to make the most of our energy and resources in bridging progress and sustainability for all, because we believe this is what enables light is on. And our mission is to be a digital partner in sustainability and efficiency. Today, we're recognized as a global sustainability advocate. Jean-Pascal, co-chair on the board of World Economic Forum Systemic Efficiency, and also he's in the United Nations Global Compact role. And we are probably one of the early participants in the 1.5% climate pledge in Paris Accord. In short, scenario planning process has helped us anchor our focus, navigate through the many clarifying questions, and provided the framework in which we execute our strategy. And throughout this panel discussion, I hope I get a chance to share with you even more specificity of how this scenario planning has helped us grow, but growing in a way that is more agile, resilient, especially during this unprecedented year, the COVID year.
So for Schneider, scenario planning is deep rooted within its purpose as a business itself. It is not an exercise that you do in business planning, is what you're saying. And it is deep rooted in the purpose of driving and building a sustainable planet.
Well, I would put it this way. The difference between a purpose and a tagline is that you have the forward view, and to taking the professor's words, you have a scenario that is planned for the future, looking backwards to inform what should the roadmap we take in order to live up to the purpose that we have identified for ourselves. When we say bridging progress and sustainability for all, progress is about access to energy and digital. We fundamentally believe this is a basic human right. Today, you imagine 1.3 billion people in the world still have no access to energy. Okay, that's devastating. I think in Malaysia, generally speaking, access to energy is pretty good. Okay, I still remember growing up in Kampong where I was still using, kerosene lamps and things like that. Yes, I am a bit older than what it seems. However, today, I think most Malaysians would take electricity supply for granted. In fact, a lot of the millennial generations, Malaysians included, probably the biggest problem they have, I have two teenage sons, so I can share this. Probably the biggest problem they will tell you, what's the Wi-Fi password? Why is the Wi-Fi not fast enough? It's amazing how over a generation, the basic need has changed. And when we say progress, we want everybody to have access to energy, but not only energy, but green energy. And when we say sustainability, the truth is, if you think about urbanization, globalization, and industrialization, we need 2 times as much energy in the coming 20, 30 years. At the same time, we need to cut emission by half. So a simple math, we need to be 4 times more efficient in everything that we do if we want to fulfill sustainability and progress. And these 2 things are not binary. They can be done together. Why? Because technology exists. All it takes is willpower, focus, some scenario planning will help us chart and map the way towards doing that. And we have got pretty good examples to tell you on how we've done that.
Excellent. So how do you bring that purpose down to, for example, now you had a situation like the pandemic, and can you share with us, because I was just looking at the results which you announced for third quarter. It seems you have upgraded your forecast for the rest of the year. So how do you translate this vision, this purpose, to maybe practical examples or specific scenarios that you could do better? And therefore, you have been in a position that you are now saying, hey, we are slightly better and slightly ahead of how we thought we will end this year.
Well, Manoj, to be fair, we are far from being perfect. We're still learning every day. We want to get even better. Okay, so we are our own biggest critic, and I think that is an important element of value that any company should have. I wanted to quote that during this pandemic, I will tell you the one clear winner of COVID, any guess, is digital. COVID has accelerated digital adoption than any CEO or chief digital officer can do. Okay. And the truth is, in Schneider, we didn't do this year. We've been leveraging digital for efficiency and sustainability for a long time. We remember in the 90s, we were the first one to introduce what we call transparent factory. It is actually Internet of Things before the word Internet of Things was created, just to be clear. And at that time, people were asking us, are you crazy? Why do you need that? But for those of you who are in manufacturing, you know, programmable logic control, PLC, and automation in industry has long adopted digitization. So I spoke earlier about scenario planning on digital. It has changed the way we work, we live, right? And suddenly the home, as you say, is your school, is your office. And Manoj, you've been doing probably record webinars this year and talks. And you know what's the other thing? Is suddenly you have homemade chef and bakers shooting off the roof, which is not a bad thing. And it seems like a lifetime ago when internet was invented, but it's only 60 years ago. Amazon, Google, Netflix is only 22 years old. So episode 1 of digital was indeed about connecting people to people. But the next episode of digital is about IoT, is about connecting people to machine, machine to machine, system to cloud. And in the coming 20 years, remember, you're going to have 3x more connected product equipped with sensors for communication. Multiply that by 5x of big data aggregation and amplify that to the power of 6 times of artificial intelligence possibilities. When you talk about digital, we cannot skip 5G and data center because it is not just about telcos. Just to give you an example, in March this year, Schneider in France, we worked with Orange, a local telco there. We implemented the first indoor 5G deployment trial at our factory. We operated EcoStructure's, Schneider's EcoStructure augmented reality, telepresence robot visits with high precision geolocation capability. We even implemented remote factory acceptance testing. Can you imagine during COVID, we have remote monitoring, control, acceptance testing. Not only did we protect the business continuity of Schneider, we protected the business continuity of our customers. You remember, we are a business essential category because you want your power, continuity, and energy to be there.
Excellent. Great. I've got a lot of questions, so I will skip some of my own, and I will try and address some of these questions as we go along. So maybe the first one is associated with, I understand the importance of scenario planning. I get it. My board and CEO doesn't have the time for this. How do I go about convincing them to understand and work on this? So and anybody can answer. Maybe Prof, you want to take this?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. The answer is that they're already doing it and probably doing it badly because they're not attending to the fact that they're doing it. Whenever you make a plan for launching a new set of products or investing capital expenditure for more digital, as Chris and her colleagues have done, or hiring a new skill pool of artificial intelligence experts for your cybersecurity function, or whatever it is that you're doing, you're already attending to the context implicitly. And that works okay if the context is given. So if you are absolutely sure that that context is going to be there for you, you can plan, focus on planning and not focus on the context of planning. However, in a situation such as the one we're in, and not only because of COVID, but because of geopolitical tensions across the Pacific and within and across Asia, and so on, you can no longer get that context for granted. And so what you need to do is allocate more time of the planning time to assess the context than to just look at the plan itself. And when I listen to Chris, and I've worked, as she says, with her and her colleagues now for some time, one of the things that they have as a challenge, and any telecom operator and their clients have as a challenge, is this growth of demand that Internet of Things and sensor-intensive everything will have relating to each other, and energy demand. There's all kinds of calculations that in 10 years' time, so in this coming decade, the proportion of electricity that is going to be used, in fact, of global energy that is going to be taken by data, is going to, or the whole of information and communications technology, is going to go from about 10% today to 20%. Now, that is in a heating world where a lot of electricity and energy will go into cooling. According to some projections, cooling by 2030 will be as energy intensive as automobiles are. Today, if you look at the amount of energy that email requires, depending on who you calculate, it's about a quarter to the same amount, or a quarter of the amount or the same amount as cars. It takes 1 boiling liter of water for energy to have 220 Google searches. And I certainly use Google a lot, and I'm sure everybody on this call does. So the amount of energy that is being demanded to be available for the kind of growth that Chris has just outlined, and I'm sure that TM1 and Telekom Malaysia is planning for, will require a huge amount of extra energy. We in scenario planning, we know that things that cannot go on forever will not go on forever. And one thing that cannot go on forever is the growth of energy demand, not only quantity, but as a percentage of all energy that the digital plans hope for. And so one of the things that can be expected is that there will be quite a lot of investment, and I'm sure Schneider Electric is doing that with a lot of its partners, to find more efficient ways of transmitting data, storing data, analyzing data. Data centers now are one of the biggest consumers of energy worldwide. And for Telekom Malaysia, I was very glad to hear that there's all kinds of innovation sandboxes being enabled by the government, because one of the big strategic questions for the government and for industry will be how ahead of the curve are they on the R&D aspect of it, not just assembling equipment for export, but also actually being on the leading edge of R&D. And there will be a big demand for that. So you do have to look at the trends from the past that are unsustainable and think what opportunities that opens up. And last thing I wanted to say, I agree with Chris, of course, that the big problem after COVID is addressed is climate change. You also have in Malaysia one of the 17 top countries for biodiversity. And biodiversity is what's going to make the context sustainable. It'll be very interesting to see how the digitalization of business and government in Malaysia supports rather than destroys the biodiversity that Malaysia offers, not only for its own citizens, but for the world as a whole.
Okay, excellent. Maybe next question, and I'll try and go through as many as I can. What are the internal and external dependencies to achieve scenario planning goals? And I think, Chris, you talk a lot about, for you, it is scenario planning is not in isolation. It is also because you're a B2B company, you've got to work with your customers to help them achieve their business continuity and their scenario planning goals as well. You want to talk a bit about it?
I'd love to, but before I go there, maybe I just wanted to dovetail on a little bit of what Professor had said about data center. You know what? We can all contribute to making it work by having green data center, net zero data center, okay? And in fact, I wanted to quote this, that there's been announced that some of you may know, a Malaysian and Japanese owned company, Regal Orion, is building a $290 million green data center in Labu, Negeri Sembilan, occupying 11,500 square meter with over 4,000 racks, making it the largest facility to be housed in a single site in Southeast Asia, and it's green. How awesome is that? Okay, it makes me proud, right, to be a Malaysian, to know that this is happening in there. Okay, so now coming to your question about, hey, how do we work with the various different stakeholders internally, externally to make it work? This is a good, I will use one example to illustrate this. I talk about the three facets of scenario planning that we'll be focusing on: digital, energy transition, and sustainability. Let me use sustainability as an example, because this really touches on all the different stakeholders. In Schneider, we look at sustainability from 4 dimensions. Dimension number 1, sustainability is our business. Okay, because our EcoStruxure solutions provide efficiency opportunities, not only good for our customers' top line, thanks to reduced downtime, improved uptime, and bottom line, because of process and energy saving. It is also, as you asked, Manoj, is a solid line to every company's commitment to their climate and carbon pledge. And some of you may not know this, but we procure over 30 billion euro of energy every year for our customers, delivering the needed renewable mix, peak and off-peak savings, and more. Our energy and sustainability service provides consulting and management platform for our customers to track and drive employee adoption. I want to give you one example. This year, in the middle of the pandemic, Walmart, which is a huge organization, didn't waver from their long-term commitment. We supported Walmart in launching Walmart's Project Gigaton, which is to save 1 billion metric tons of carbon avoidance from their supply chain by 2030. So that's a huge ambition, and we all should be in there because it's possible. Now, this is working with customers, and we have got more examples on this. Secondly, sustainability is how we drive our innovation. So how we create products, it needs to start from there. It's not good enough to just talk about it. We spearheaded a program called Green Premium since 2008. That's 12 years ago. It is our eco label where 75% of our product provide transparent information about hazardous substances, environmental impact, end of life instructions, etc. We are also piloting a lot of biodegradable plastic replacement. Professor talked about biodiversity. We're using sugarcane, potato to make plastics for your switch and sockets in home. Think about that. Recently, we have just launched an AirSet, which is a medium voltage switchgear that is the world's first, which will be free of SF6 sulfur hexafluoride gas, which is very hazardous and by far deliver much more negative impact than carbon. And we are proud that our customers are joining us in piloting this innovation. Ongi in France, ATM in Italy, Inditex that makes Zara, some of you know Zara brand, Renault Automotive, Thirdly, we drive sustainability with our open partner system, not just our R&D community, not just with our customers, with our partner. We partner with Carlyle Group. We launch Alpha Structure, which design, build, own, and operate next generation of energy system for commercial industrial infrastructure. Guess what? With no upfront capex to customer. And we're currently building the new green and autonomous JFK terminal in New York. Green Structure is another joint venture we have with Hub Capital, where we offer modular standardized energy as a service solution to mid-sized building, again with zero upfront capex. So this is to help the adoption and accelerating of resilient green energy. Schneider Electric Exchange, if you have not heard of it, check it out, is an open platform where we democratize technology. We welcome developers from Malaysia, from Africa, from anywhere, where we give you technical support and access to market projects in developing apps to solve sustainability and efficiency challenges for the planet. Last but not least, it's not good enough that we just deliver things that are sustainable. It needs to be how we act and how we behave and the value system in which we are. So a few points. We brought forward our carbon neutral commitment to 2025 and net zero by 2030. We believe sustainable business calls for a more equitable workforce. As an example, we achieved gender pay equity this year since we launched the ambition 3 years ago. 40% of our board and management committee are women. In my own leadership team, I have 15 people. I have 11 nationalities based in 10 cities around the world. So yes, a lot of screen meetings this year. We cannot sustain a progressive company. Yeah.
No, please continue.
Yeah. We cannot sustain a progressive company without contributing to the community as well. Huh? A few months ago, we launched Tomorrow Rising Fund to help communities to respond, recover, become more resilient impacted by COVID-19. In Malaysia, we work with Dignity for Children Foundation. We donated laptops, school supply, food, hygiene items, medicine. Now, this week, Manoj, I don't know whether you've been following, we launched a very unique world first, a Schneider Sustainability Bond with a nominal value of 650 million euro. And it's oversubscribed. In less than 2 days, we have raised 700 million euro. And this is going to be delivered against 3 KPIs. We will fulfill, in 5 years' time, 800 megatons of CO2 avoidance with our customer, a gender diversity of 50% new hires to be female, 40% frontline managers to be female, and 30% of leadership to be female. And we're going to train 1 million people in underprivileged communities to create microfinancing economies to be self-sustaining. So I've just given you an example of how, when we do scenario planning, when we implement it, how we work internally with our people on, for example, developing our gender equity programs and many other diversity and inclusion programs, how we work with the community in which we work with, how we work with innovation, digital, and R&D, how we work with our customers in adopting all this that we do, including planning for their value chain and supply chain. So it is absolutely something that you need to work across all the different stakeholders.
Yeah, one last point, Chris, I know you mentioned this to me earlier, is also tying it back to the individual KPIs of the business leaders, because then you have the completeness of the ecosystem and the ability to follow through and make the management leaders equally liable to execute on the plan. You want to comment briefly on that?
Absolutely. So we've been doing sustainability executionally for the last 15 years based on the rotating 3-year plan, because you need to update and you need to refresh. And what we do is we self-impose targets from zero waste, landfill, to recycle packaging, to gender diversity, to training, to all, of course, renewables and net zero emission, etc. And we make sure that all these KPI is tied to the bonus and compensation scheme of all the leaders in the company. So if
So
we
it
don't
is not just
deliver, we don't
EBITDA
get
and
paid.
margin.
No, absolutely not.
Okay, excellent. So thank you. So Prof, maybe, I think you're having some issues aligning to the center. So you could move in the opposite direction of you are moving now. I think this works in a slightly, yeah. So if you could move the other way, that's
This,
better. I think you're right. Oh, this is
okay.
wonderful. Yeah, yeah. So Prof, one of the other questions that come up is we plan for these scenarios, and very often, sometimes we overestimate how quickly these scenarios will happen, or sometimes it takes much longer than what you expect, and companies lose they lose momentum with that, and then they give up on it, and then they end up falling off the train. So I see that happening quite a lot. Many companies embarked on digital transformation initiatives, and yet they were sometimes too ahead of the game. And so what is your message to companies, so that how do you stay focused, so that that sometimes you plan for these scenarios, sometimes they take longer than expected, sometimes they happen much sooner. Do you have any pieces of advice on that?
Yeah, it is a good question. Thank you. There's multiple angles to this. On the one hand, sometimes the future arrives later than you were planning for, and then you overinvest for a future that you've been waiting for. That happened, for example, with Rolls-Royce, the people that make engines for large aircraft. They had planned for jets coming out of the Seattle warehouses of Boeing and the Toulouse ones for Airbus. The Dreamliner was late, the A350 was late. Capacity for airframes that were not coming out. And that does create a problem. And they did use scenario planning a bit like Schneider Electric has done. One of the things is to do Vincent Petit, that works with Chris in her strategy department, did scenario planning helped by myself and colleagues in Norman Partners, the consulting company I work with and co-founded. And we did scenarios with them on the future of energy, and then quickly about how would this work out in the coming shorter period. And then with COVID, they were quite prepared to deal with that, not only in terms of the risks, but also the opportunities it opened up for the firm to more proactively position themselves earlier on. So scenarios should not be thought of as a product, as a book that is put on a shelf, but as a process of sense making and sense giving. And as Chris has put it in the case of Schneider Electric, it's not only making sense for the board and the executive team of Schneider Electric's leadership, but it's also a way of pacing how their suppliers and their procurement people work, how the customers relate to each other. I've written a book with my colleague Ulf Mannervik called Strategy for a Networked World. And if you're in a networked world, which certainly Telecom Malaysia and its clients, both in the public and the private sector are, and as we heard from the opening lectures, they're enabling, you have to do scenario planning with others, not only for others. And so I would expect in Malaysia that there will be more scenario planning collectively, and to look collaboratively at what kind of business ecosystem can be enabled jointly. We have a hypothesis which my colleagues in Oxford are laying out in an online course called the Oxford View on Strategy, which will be available as of December, an online course, that in these turbulent times, collaborative strategy frames a competitive strategy. And so one of the things is that everybody is in effect doing scenario planning in what we call the ghost scenario. There's a phantom ghost scenario in the back of our mind, create a plan on anything, risk management. We heard about the green bond. If you issue a green bond, you expect a certain towards the planning to do well in that bond. So if you have an investor relation strategy, or you have employee relation strategy, or you have a supply chain strategy, you're already doing scenario planning. And the balance here is to pay more attention to the context, because if you don't, the context will come out and catch you in a way that you should have thought through and you did not.
Correct. A very interesting question, because Telecom Malaysia's customers span small businesses and large businesses. So this question is, how could scenario planning help a small retailer, especially in a situation like COVID, where things change, and you are a small business? How could we have planned for this? Is it important for us? Could we have done any better?
One of my ex-students, Christian Visdomini, he advises retailers in New York. And he and I penned a piece exactly on this issue in the Oxford Said Business School website. There's a section called Oxford Answers. And you can look at a piece there by Christian and I. And Christian basically realized, having taken our program, that the models that were used to finance small and not so small retailers in New York did not give them a low enough situation that COVID was going to bring around. So instead of doing financing within the model of small and medium-sized retailers, he decided to do financing way beyond what the model did. The model was a bit of a mental prison. It was based on, of course, the past, pre-COVID. And he thought, actually, with COVID, the fall in visiting retailing will go a lot lower than what the model allows us to do. So let's think of a different model for financing retailing. And he helped his clients do that. I have another student who has worked a lot with medium and small sized organizations in the city of Valencia in Spain, which has been one of the big furniture makers in Europe. And he can follow how the small and medium-sized companies in the furniture business weathered the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, which in Spain was terrible because it was highly dependent on growth in real estate, in apartments and construction. That whole sector fell, and a lot of these companies went under. But some of the ones that were more exposed to the scenario planning he was doing weathered the crisis a lot better. So scenario planning has now become the methodology that my colleagues and I here have developed in Oxford has become so adaptable that small NGOs and small companies can do it. You don't have to be a large, wealthy, or well-doing organization such as Telecom Malaysia or Schneider Electric, Shell, etc. Small organizations can do it and do it well.
Yeah. How about at the individual level? So we brought it from big business to small business. So as individuals, should we be doing scenario planning, and does that help us plan for better career transitions?
So the view that we have in Oxford is that scenario planning done well is a social process. So if you do it for your daughter or your niece or your grandson or yourself, you should not do it alone. You should do it with other people. And certainly you can start thinking, and people do that. You look at a nephew or a niece that you really like, that is going to be, apparently is very good at science, what kind of future can she or he expect, and what kind of context can be created so that that person flourishes. We do that all the time as parents and grandparents and family members, but don't do it alone, do it with other people.
Correct. I think that's a great answer. The next question is, we have, this question is from Wong Fut Yo. He says, if pandemic is a context for scenario planning and there are many different contexts, how do we choose which context to consider, prioritize? How many scenarios do we plan for? I suppose he needs to come and take a course from you.
Well, he's very welcome to, and we certainly have had lots of Malaysian participants, and they're wonderful to work with. The rule of thumb is that you should have at least 2 scenarios and no more than 4. And that's because of our cognitive capacity to imagine different futures. We could all imagine thousands of scenarios, but that would not be useful. And as you introduced me, I'm a professor of practice at Oxford, and that means I have to be practical. The working that I do has to be practical. And one of the things that distinguishes the approach that we developed here in Oxford is that the scenario planning has to be useful, not truthful. We're not trying to guess what the truth is in 2030 or in 2040. We're imagining views from 2030 or 2040 to 2020 or 2021 to be useful and used in 2020 or 21. And so what we want to do is to focus on which questions the scenarios are going to inform. Which assumptions do you have today that you're uncomfortable with? Which trends are you depending on? I just mentioned energy intensity in digitalization. That trend is unsustainable. If it's unsustainable, it won't happen. What alternative can we imagine will happen? Whether it'll happen in 2028 or 2023 is a big question. And the scenarios will inform how early it will happen and how soon you have to be prepared for it. But we manufacture, we design scenarios for today for a particular purpose that has to be clear. And one of the pieces of research that my colleagues and I are involved in developing is that the clearer you are on the purpose and the user, the more effective scenario planning is. A lot of scenario planning is undertaken without being very clear on who the user is and how she or he or they are going to use your scenarios. And if you don't have a user and a use, the whole thing is going to be useless. And then it's going to be considered too expensive and a waste of time and give scenario planning a bad name that it doesn't deserve simply because you did not conduct it the right way.
Yep. I think this next question is for Chris. How do you think advancement of our technology brings down our energy consumption? On one end, we are consuming every email we send is consuming more energy. At the same time, we are trying to work hard towards. So where are we today on that scale? Are we, and how do we manage that? And I'm sure Schneider has a big role to play in that. How do you think the advancement of our technology brings down our energy consumption?
The key thing to know is, as I put it earlier, we have an equation to solve. We need twice as much energy, and we need to halve the carbon emission. We truly believe it is not about reducing the progress of communities. We want the advancement and the progress, but we can do it in a much more efficient and effective way. Do you know that today, in a natural electrical distribution just downstream, without using the digital solutions that exist, there is minimum 30% wastage. So it's not that you are using more. There's just more leakage and more wastage that disappear because we are not applying the kind of technology to help that, to mitigate that. So this is important. So and electric, and the second part about the energy transition is about electric. And Professor talked about, look, electric is going to double as a mix of energy. And why? Why do we think that's the case? It's because it is the only vector for decarbonization. Okay. Think about, today we talk about electric cars, right? And it's going to increase to 30% by 2030. Now imagine every building is now called an electric building that is powered by renewables. You know why I'm saying this? Today, 40% of carbon emission are from buildings, your homes, your offices, your factories, and 35% are from industries, manufacturing, big plants, etc. And actually less than 10% from IT and the rest from transportation. So there are 4 things that we can do. Let's be at least 30% more efficient everywhere. thanks to digital innovation that we can use. Let's make sure we aim for minimum of 70% circularity approach in everything we do. Be sure that we're ready for a 2x electric world that is going to go to 40%. And finally, be ready to support a 6x renewable that's going to go from 6% to 40% in the coming 20 years, because it will create a green future. Okay, and I mean, it's encouraging to see the Malaysian government has set a target of achieving 20% renewable energy mix by 2025. Look at the hydropower generation to 20,000 megawatt in the Sarawak corridor of renewable energy. So it is encouraging. When you look at building, I want to give you an example. We have a customer, JLL. I think most of you know JLL it's a big player in the building management business. They manage 1.5 billion square feet of buildings of Asia Pacific, covering 50% of Fortune 500 customers. They leverage digital technologies such as remote monitoring, predictive analytics to manage a building much more operationally efficient. It's good for their bottom line. It's good for the planet. Industries, I wanted to quote, I don't know whether Petronas is with us on the call today. It is one of our biggest customers. They leverage Aviva and EcoStruxure. They deliver 5% increase in uptime thanks to machine learning and 10% reduction in maintenance costs. And do you know that a large refinery that, let's say, produces 250,000 barrels per day, we can cut reduction of 10% in process energy? Just to make sure we understand what this 10% means. 250,000 barrels per day, 10% reduction in process energy equates to 1.6 million US dollars of energy saving per day, and the CO2 reduction of more than 20,000 metric tons per year. That's like removing 4,000 to 5,000 cars off the road. So all this technology exists, and when we are building construction, 30% goes to waste because the planning and the design and the construction implementation are not connected. And you have tools such as M2 and I2 from RIP that can help you do all this. And it is not limited to just companies. I want to give you an example. Governments, right? Montgomery County in Maryland, US. They have 9,000 employees, 400 buildings, 9 million square foot. And like many other municipalities, they have limited budget. Today, Montgomery County has achieved carbon neutrality thanks to renewables, microgrid from Schneider, all without an upfront investment, because green structure gives these solutions as an energy as a service, pay as you go. So we are trying to do our part in terms of accelerating and helping the adoption in this way, to make the resiliency, to make the efficiency happen. Renewables, and at the end of the day, the infrastructure that we live in needs to be able to support it. Okay, I want to give you one other example. Viola Water Technology. It's a leader in design, deliver, maintain, upgrade water and wastewater treatment, right? We take it for granted, the water that we have. And talking about that, they adopted Aviva Connect, which is a cloud platform. During the year of the pandemic, 260 global engineering team across 5 continents, including from Malaysia, they were connected. They continue to work together during the pandemic. Using the same data, they facilitate real-time decision-making and drive better performance. And they have achieved actually more than 20% IT efficiency worldwide within just a few weeks. So all these are very real examples that is available today that can help towards energy saving, less carbon emission, without sacrificing, without sacrificing your access to progress. Okay.
Excellent. Yeah, I want to move to what I call now a rapid fire round. So we get some questions done very quickly. Yeah. So next question, which company has demonstrated the most agility and maybe is a case study on having pivoted their business during this pandemic? Any answers other than Schneider Electric, of course?
Professor, you want to go?
Well, a lot of the companies that are using scenario planning do that confidentially. If there's two companies that are using it, or one competing with another, just the fact that they're using scenario planning is signaling a particular strategic stance. So I know of cases, but I'm not capable of sharing the name because it's shared in confidence. I can tell you that some of the companies that have used scenario planning effectively and are very proud of it are companies like Merck Group in KGaA in Darmstadt, Germany, not the other Merck, which is American. They have used scenario planning very effectively to be well prepared for the crisis, and that is in the public domain. Certainly some of the energy companies have been doing very well in transitioning quickly to a post-COVID world. Some of the big majors have not done that, and in my view will pay a serious price quite soon. But a lot of companies have done that. I cannot share the names of any of the others that are not in the public domain.
Sure. When does scenario planning come into play versus traditional business planning?
When you are not sure of the context for which you're planning. Very simple.
Okay.
If you cannot predict the future context, then scenario planning is very helpful.
Got it. For effective scenario planning initiative, must a separate management committee be formed?
No. I've worked, for example, with the biggest holding company in Finland. They were very clear when they were the executive committee, and then they would have a different convening of the same people with a slightly different role, and the chairman would say, now we're doing scenario. 2 hours or 3 hours of that meeting, you switch. The board of the IMF, with whom I've had the pleasure of working twice, can switch from being the board of the IMF to being scenario planning thinkers. So you have to and the way in which you're thinking, but you can use the same people as long as it's very clear that you're doing something very differently. One of the Verizon planners I worked with several years ago said, when we're working with strategy, we're working in the company. When we're working with scenarios, we're working on the company. We're working on the future of the company, not in the company.
That's a great response. Excellent. What is the, and Chris, feel free to chime in. What is the successful rate of scenario planning versus business continuity planning?
Business continuity is informed by scenario planning. You cannot plan to be business continuous on everything because it's too expensive. Scenario planning was another thing. I mean, we saw in Southeast Asia during the typhoon season several years ago, many factories being flooded. And that was something that a lot of their clients were not clear on. And so being prepared for that eventuality gives you contingency planning. The contingency planning typically is where the big expense is, because you have to ensure that you have that contingency. But which contingency you plan for, scenario planning can inform.
Excellent.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to jump on that, since the question is also about. I fully agree that scenario planning informs business continuity planning. In our case, because we make a choice to have a digital scenario planning lens over the years. During this year, we're quite proud that we're able to use our playbook. Believe it or not, within 2 days, we have everybody being able to up and running, work from home. We have 3,000 customer service, customer care agents that are able to support 110% increase in calls from home, that we're able to help facilitate that infrastructure. Again, it is with the playbook. And just nearer to me as a marketing, as a CMO for a B2B business, one of the key things that we do are events. And guess what? This year, we've done over 4,000 of digital events covering over 420,000 customers. So, you know, and the team is able to pivot within the first few weeks to be able to implement a new platform, a new process. So I would say that the resiliency of the human spirit, of the people capital should not be underestimated.
How far in the future can we think and care about? What is the best time horizon to use for scenario planning?
For scenario planning, you create a distance so that you can see a different future than the one you were expecting. So the number of years you think of ahead are not to 2040. It's to get from 2040 a different enough view of what we should do in 2040. You're looking at the future as a point of view than the point of view you have in the present. And sometimes in energy intensive, big capital expenditure organizations, Chris was talking about Petronas or Shell, where I worked, that is in the decades. Or if you're in the mining industry, again, that's in the decades. A mine that you create in Mongolia or in Chile or in Australia is going to be there for many decades. So you have to think many decades out. In fast-moving digital environments, 10 years is a very long time. Five years sometimes is a long time as well. So the long term depends on the industry and the setting and the uncertainty and the speed of the organization. And if you're going to do this iteratively, and Schneider Electric does do it iteratively, you can do a 10-year scenario in a first iteration, you do years get it into a more accurate, more detailed, more action perspective. You can do this iteratively. You can do it in a 10-year one first, and then 3 years, or in a 3-year one first, and a 20-year one afterwards. That's a practical decision based on making the scenarios useful for the purpose in which it's being developed.
Manoj, if I may add
Yes.
to that, think about the business that Schneider is in. I mentioned earlier in the beginning of this session, a lot of times our customer have our equipment over 20 to 30 years lifetime, right? And we're talking about the disruption of digitization. So in our category, there is still a lot of customers that are not ready to go to digital, okay? But because we have a scenario planning that we know there is no question about, it's not an if, it's a when and how deep and how wide and who. So that's the only question you have. We make a conscious choice to invest that our R&D is all about connectivity and digitized solutions. We make sure that when we implement our solution on site with our customer, it is what we call a connectable product. So it is a communicatable and a connectable product, even if the customer is not ready to switch it on, even if the customer is not ready to adopt the apps and the applications in there. And for me, this would be a very concrete scenario planning in action. Imagine anything that we are installing today in our customer's premise is going to sit there for 20, 30 years. So if we are able to already implement digital capable, digital enabled, even if you don't know you are going to use it in the next 2 years, 5 years, it's there. So that, for me, it's a very clear evidence of an implementation of a scenario planning that we've done on digital.
Excellent. Last question, which is, for many CEOs who are attending today's session, what are possible, Professor, you talked about maybe 2 scenarios to consider as you look at planning. So what are possible scenarios that you recommend that people could look at to work towards, to help prepare, let's say, resilient companies to navigate the future better?
I very, very strongly encourage people to make their own scenarios. I worked with a big, well-known resource company many years ago who had made the mistake of taking some of the World Economic Forum scenarios and worked with them. And they were very good for the World Economic Forum. They were designed for the World Economic Forum. They were used in Davos. They were very effective. But when they said, okay, let's use those scenarios for ourselves, they realized very quickly that there were all kinds of things that were designed for the purpose they were designed for that was not for them. So very, very clearly, it's worth investing in your own scenario set, developing your own scenarios. It will give you ideas of things that some of your colleagues in the executive team think could happen that you were not aware they were thinking about. It will give you a common language to make disagreement into an asset rather than disagreement into a liability, because you play out what faction A is actually expecting from the future versus faction B, and then you can make that discussable and say under what future conditions would faction A be right, and under what future conditions would faction B be right. Don't use public scenarios for yourself. It will not work well for you. But if you want to find out about how to use scenarios, best advice is find a fellow CEO or a fellow head of risk or a fellow strategist in another company, in another sector who has used it. Colleagues that are peers are much better at explaining it than professors or consultants. I mean, we're very good at talking the talk, but it's people like Chris and her colleagues that walk it. And if you want to find out how to use scenario planning, go and talk to Vincent Petit or Emmanuel Lagarrigue or any of the other people that Chris works with that are driving this in Schneider Electric. They're a much better peer group than professors. Of course, if they want to come to Oxford or to email me, they're very happy to do that. I talk to people all over the world every week about scenario planning. I was very happy to see that the new president of Peru, Francisco Sagasti, an old friend, is a scenario planner, and I wish him well. So thank you for that.
Excellent. Chris, any last comments from you?
Yes. Well, you know, I am an optimist. Okay, I have a great kind of optimism about the future and what it brings, despite a really trying 2020 year. Okay, so scenario planning have helped Schneider to better prepare for digitization, electrification, and sustainability. But I truly believe, while it is good to have a plan, scenario planning, a plan, it takes commitment, courage, gut, and conviction to make things happen. What you do not want to have is just a plan. So, in other words, apart from a plan, if I may, okay, we need the right leadership and people culture that will determine whether your organization can execute on the plan. Otherwise, it's just a very expensive piece of paper. In our brave new world, we need to operate with an open mindset, which means collaboration with an ecosystem. Be bold, take risk, learn from mistakes, correct them, move on fast. Be agile, be ready to pivot to tackle new challenges ahead of you. Be alert. Speed is critical. And I have maybe one thing to offer here. Think about opportunities as perishables. It will be gone faster than you can imagine. Disrupt or be disrupted. Very often, your new competitors do not come from your current competitive set. Digitization is not a journey. Digitization is a journey and not a destination. The key is to be on the track. So ask yourself, are you on the digital motion track? Does your organization have the clock speed to operate digitally? Last but not least, I have to do this. I hope, at least through today's session and exchange, I have excited you a little bit about sustainability. It is good for your top line, for your bottom line, and guess what? For our common planet. Our generation came to know about climate change, and it is our generation that can change the trajectory of carbon emission and deliver on a climate positive impact. It is our obligation, it is our duty. I hope you will join the journey of sustainability.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chris, for that very good summary. I have noted down 5 things I picked up throughout the session, and allow me to quickly do that and summarize our session. I think the first thing I picked up was it is not prediction, really. So don't use scenario planning as predicting the future. It is really planning for that uncertain future. Second thing is it is for everyone. Yeah, it is for everyone. It is for the small business, it's for the large business, it's for an individual. Third one, and I thought that was pretty cool, which is it is a social exercise. So instead of conversations on Teh Tarik about Liverpool and Manchester United, we need to start doing conversations on scenario planning, eh? Because that will truly help us build resilient companies. We should continue Liverpool and Manchester United, but this is equally important. Fourth one is listen to people who have done it. I think just listening to Chris, who is a practitioner, I think has really opened up our eyes on how it can really impact our business. And final point is the kind of tomorrow that we will inherit. I think what kind of tomorrow will our strategy of today inherit is the question that we ask, that we look to guiding to navigating our future. So with that, it is greatest gratitude to both, first to Professor, because it's, I think now 4 a.m. in the morning. Are you ready for your morning breakfast?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much, Chris. It has been such a pleasure. And I thought we really learned so much, and I hope it has inspired many people to build careers as well as to leverage scenario planning in their respective companies. Please, I would like to delighted to pass it back to Deborah to continue this conversation on LEAP 2020. Thank you again.
Thank you for the
Thank you.
opportunity. Bye-bye.